with Radu Emanuel. He is the Senior Security Research Engineer at Ixia, a key site business, and he will present us today how to investigate Windows graphic vulnerabilities, a reverse engineering and fuzzing story.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello everyone. Give me a second to load the presentation. First of all, hello everyone. My name is Radu Emanuel. I'm a security research engineer at Ixia Application Threat Intelligence team in Bucharest. We're doing a lot of interesting stuff there. We're analyzing malware, we're looking into vulnerabilities and how to reproduce them and so on and so forth. This presentation is one of my projects this year. I started looking into fuzzing attempts and how we can use fuzzing to uncover vulnerabilities or new ones. So first of all, I'm going to start the question for you. How many of you here ever heard about fuzzing or even tried to attempt to do some fuzzing on their own? Please raise your hand. It's good that in this room it's security enthusiasts. There are some people that are interested about fuzzing because it's a large part of the actual vulnerability finding in the whole security ecosystem. So my job as a security researcher involves looking into all kinds of vulnerabilities in different kinds of applications. Some of them have proof of concept attached to it, but most of them don't. And usually that those don't have proof of concepts are the most interesting ones, but also the hardest to investigate. To make the matter worse, for some of them we don't even have the source code available, as is the case with Microsoft Windows vulnerabilities. So the purpose of this presentation is to give an exhaustive overview what you could do and how to approach these cases in which you do not have the proof of concept or even the source code available in order to root cause the vulnerability. So let me grab your attention for half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. But first of all, a little bit of background into the Microsoft security patching ecosystem. So how many of you heard about BlueKeep? Please raise your hand. And Eternal Blue, I guess it's a little bit more popular. I'm expecting more hands, so everyone heard of Eternal Blue. That, of course, indicates that Microsoft vulnerabilities are highly valuable. They are sold on the black market as the price of an AK-47, even more. And some of them, we don't even know that those vulnerabilities exist and are still sold online. For example, the Recorded Future did an investigation last year, and it turns out that the 10 most exploited vulnerabilities were actual vulnerabilities in Microsoft Office products. You can do one simple search on cvedetail.com and see for yourself that only last year more than 700 vulnerabilities on Microsoft products were identified, and those are only ones that we know about, right? So what does Microsoft do exactly? When they identify a vulnerability, either their team security research center identified it or other security researcher that sends down the details, they're patching it, and after that they're releasing a security advisory. The security advisory doesn't contain too many information, really. It just tells you what is the exact vulnerable module, what is the kind of vulnerability, and it provides you a link to the patch in order for you to download it. But there is nothing else really for a security researcher to work with in order to investigate the actual vulnerability. So I started looking into the vulnerabilities that were showing up this year in Microsoft products, and I stumbled upon a few of them, getting a lot of numbers on GDI. Who here in this room heard about GDI? Please raise your hand. It was pretty new to me as well when I started investigation. So GDI stands for Graphics Device Interface. It's the component from Microsoft that takes care of rendering fonts and basically drawing stuff such as shapes and colors and so on and so forth. It doesn't handle drawing actual Windows forms. That is the job of another subsystem. It's called user32.dll. That is its job. GDI just mainly draws fonts and shapes. It's one of the oldest subsystems in Windows. Its nascency. You would find the GDI subsystem there, and some of its code runs more than 30 years later. There's also a thing of note that starting with Windows NT, Microsoft development team decided to move the drivers for GDI from user space to kernel space. That was thought of being a good thing because it improved. It was a decision in order to optimize the rendering process. But when you move code from user space to kernel space, usually there is a security problem there. Because if now you would identify a problem with a certain operation that involves the GDI drivers, then you would practically manage to gain privilege escalation, and you would have complete system rights into the Windows. So this is one opportunity that malicious actors identified, and they started to use this. They started to actually use GDI vulnerabilities in their malware campaigns, such as Turan T28. And if you think that GDI component was thoroughly investigated during those years, you are wrong, because only this year more than 30 vulnerabilities were actually identified in GDI. So it's still active, it's still out there, and people are still looking into it. So I decided to choose this baby to look at. This vulnerability, we don't have too many details about it. Microsoft only tells us that it's a critical heap overflow vulnerability, and it could lead to remote code execution in certain scenarios. And we also know that it affects GDI plus the DLL, which is a DLL that is a component of the GDI subsystem. We also know, investigating, I found this ZDI report that told us that the actual vulnerability lies in the dual rotated stretch DLP method, which is going to be useful information for the investigation to follow. Of course, the vulnerability had no proof of concept, otherwise this presentation would have no reason to exist. Okay, so what are we going to do now? We are going to employ patch diffing. Everyone heard of patch diffing here? Okay, so I'll try to describe it. Patch diffing is not a new technique, but it's a very powerful one. It practically allows you to identify what was the patch, what was the fix, and how was the fix conducted. So it's powerful in that manner, but it can also be useful if you start to look at a certain component for a larger period of time, because for conducting patch diffing for certain fixes, then you can understand the development process, where the vulnerabilities and weaknesses arise more frequently, and so on and so forth. So a lot of people are doing patch diffing, and this is how usually you approach vulnerabilities that do not have vulnerabilities for which you don't have the code base available. The tools of choice for conducting patch diffing are Darwin Green, BinDiff, and DF4. I've used all three of them, but I'm mostly content with BinDiff. It allows you to integrate with IDA. It works with IDA. It's written in Python, and it's pretty quick. And it will give you all the methods listed with the degree of similarity, as we are going to see. So the whole operation involves taking two consecutive patches. If you ever had to patch or look at an actual patch from Microsoft, it's a cabinet file which contains a lot of DLLs and other system files. Then you extract the DLL of interest from them, in our case GDI+, as we saw from the ZDI report from the Microsoft Security Advisory. And you import those DLL in IDA, let it run its initial analysis on both of them, and activate the BinDiff plugin, which are going to do the actual differentiation operation. And then we'll get to inspect the differences. So this is exactly what I have done, really. I've taken two different DLLs, a patched one and a vulnerable one. I've tried to keep it as close as possible, the file version, in order to not look into a big amount of code. And lo and behold, this is the output of the BinDiff operation. So the important columns to identify is the similarity column, confidence, primary name, and secondary name. For primary and secondary name, is those columns identify the actual methods within the DLLs. And for a certain method, you can see the similarity between the method from the DLL, the unpatched DLL, and the patched one. So lo and behold, after the if operation, the plugin tells us that for the method of interest that we have identified in the ZDI report, the rotated stage BLT namely, we have a similarity of 0.96 between the fixed and unfixed vulnerable version. Pretty cool until here, right? But we can also see that there are methods with a lot of parameters, and that is going to happen and make our analysis and reversing process a bit more difficult. Okay, let's move forward. I don't know if you can see correctly, maybe those in front are a little bit more, can see a little bit better. But BIMDIF also gives us this feature of seeing both methods, the vulnerable and the patched one, side by side. And it's a basic block comparison. So we can easily identify which section of the actual code is a section where the patch was conducted. And we can, and this is going to help us make our investigation a little bit easier. So let's jump into the exact section of that code and see what's going on. Okay, with green we have the patched code from the DLL written by Microsoft team, and in red we have the unpatched vulnerable code. Let's take a look at, in the beginning, let's take a look at the vulnerable code. So at a first glance, my intuition tells me that we are dealing with a classic unsafe copy operation, in which we do not sanitize the size of the amount of bytes that are copied within the destination buffer. So it's a classic memcopy case of a buffer overflow. So in order to test that, if it's a valid statement, let's look at the patch code. The patch code indeed creates a sanitization check in which it checks for the size parameter before doing the actual memcopy operation. So in this case, the binfo header, which is the destination buffer, is going to be as big as the size parameter when the memcopy operation is done. But if the size parameter is within our control, maybe can we make a big enough allocation as to crash the whole process? As you can see at line 238, before doing the actual memcopy, we create an allocation using the local alloc method available in the DLL. So if the size is within our control, maybe we can crush the whole process by making a big allocation, right? So did Microsoft did a good job with this patch? It turns out that they did, because in another section of the code, they included another method which is not available in the vulnerable one, which is called bvalidate and expand buffer. What this method essentially does is practically truncates all the size, and it makes sure that the allocations are doing in a safe manner and with predictable with a predictable length. So we cannot actually bypass the patch done by Microsoft and create a denial of service. So the patch is okay, but at least we understand where the problem is. What can we do from this point onwards? So our purpose here is to reach that part of vulnerable code in order to trigger an actual crash. What we can do from this point is to use another of IDA features, which is called xref tool, which comes to references tool. This will practically allow us to create a control flow graph, an actual call graph in which in the bottom we have our method of interest where the vulnerability lies, and we can see all the methods within that DLL, the vulnerable one, that eventually make the call to the vulnerable method. So this is useful for us because since our method is not an external one, we cannot use it directly from like an API from DLL. Maybe those methods that instead call our method will indirectly call in a certain situation and allow us to make to call the vulnerable method and trigger the vulnerability. So we see we have some entry points here that are marked in red, but all they have specific names, such as bhandle-blt. So bhandle-blt will call our vulnerable method in certain situations, but all the red methods that eventually call our method of interest are not external methods either. So what can we do? We guess we have to go into the DLL with our reversing process and dig a little bit deeper. Okay. But in order to understand how we can trigger this operation, handle-blt, we have to understand a little bit about EMF format. So EMF format is a proprietary Windows, a Microsoft Windows format. Practically an EMF file consists of a chain of different records. And this chain of different records will practically allow us to represent a graphical image. Let's say, for example, that we want to render in our display a rectangle that is filled with green color and it's a little bit rotated. Let's say to the left it's 45 degrees. Then an EMF file describing this situation would have first a record for the rectangle, like a polyline, then a rectangle that will have the function for the green color that will populate the whole rectangle, and another record that will have the transformation operation, the rotation with 45 degrees. So 3 records chained together in order to describe an image. And that is what EMF file is. And when I have understood that, it dawned on me that somehow these records have to be accounted for in the DLL, in the vulnerable one. So as when the DLL is served with a certain EMF file, we'll know what handle to serve for that specific record within the EMF file. So it turns out that all the handlers that we saw earlier, which are the entry points for our interesting method, are accounted for in an array that is called drawing orders. So what we realize now is that we have to trigger a drawing order for a specific kind of record in order to indirectly call our method of interest. So here it is, handle HDLT as we saw earlier. So this is what we have to do. We have to somehow call the drawing order array indexed with a handler HDLT integer value. So it turns out, after more analysis, that a drawing order is triggered by a method which is called bparse win32 meta file. And we're starting to get a little bit of goosebumps here because we're getting a little bit, we're getting to some methods that are probably API calls, and we can make them from exterior, from our code. So let's stop and think for a minute. We have the toStretchBLT method, which calls our vulnerable method. Then we have the bparse win32 meta file that will call eventually the toStretchBLT if it's served with the right record. In our case, EMF stretchBLT record. So when I have consulted Microsoft documentation, I've stumbled upon the meta file class, which allows us to operate with such kind of files, with EMF files and so on and so forth. And one of those calls was EMF to VMF bits. And it turns out that this method calls the bparse win32 meta file, which is exactly the method that we needed to call. And so we have to make this chain of calls, starting from the meta file EMF to VMF bits method using the Microsoft API, and hopefully with the right kind of coding, we will manage to reach our vulnerable method. But as you see, it's very convoluted and it's a lot of work to do. So at this point, I decided that this is exactly what I have to do. I have to create an EMF file that contains an EMF stretchBLT record and make that certain API call. Hopefully, it will reach our vulnerable method. But at this point, you start to wonder as a security researcher, how was this vulnerability discovered in the first place? Because it seems like really hard. Someone really analyzed and went through the code, well, not through the code on the using IDA, and they disassembled it. So that was pretty hard. And so my hypothesis was that this vulnerability was discovered using fuzzing techniques. So I started thinking if I can use fuzzing on my own in order to get to the bottom of this vulnerability. Okay, so for those in the room that are not familiar with fuzzing, I'll make a crash course of 5 minutes about fuzzing. So fuzzing is about throwing randomized input to a program in order to make it and put it in a weird state in which the programmer and the programmer haven't thought about that certain state. So you're essentially trying to create different inputs in order to crash the application and identify what was wrong and what was mishandled. This is useful both for the security researcher and for the programmer as well, because the programmer can use fuzzing to make its code more robust, but the security researcher can use it to find a lot of bugs and CVEs and resolve those. But the fuzzing is not important for management, of course. What are those warnings in the compilation time? We don't care about warnings, ship that product anyways. Okay, so there are multiple classifications of fuzzing strategies, but the one I like the most is evolutionary-based fuzzing versus generational-based fuzzing. So evolutionary-based fuzzing is about using genetic algorithms in order to increase code coverage. So what you do, you create a test case, then use a certain mutation technique, then you verify if that sample that were generated using mutation has a bigger code coverage. If it has a bigger code coverage, then I enforce that type of mutation in order to create more and more coverage. And based on this, we essentially favor those mutations that increase our code coverage, which is pretty awesome. And it allows us to identify vulnerabilities as well. On the other side, we have generational-based fuzzing, in which we basically use something which is called grammar. A grammar is a set of specification which allows us to build a correct input. An input which will be served to the application, and the application is going to accept it as being a valid input, not how it is the case with evolutionary-based fuzzing, which basically comes with input from nothing. And since we have used the grammar and we generated a valid test case for the application, then the actual processing is going to go deeper into the code, and we're going to find more interesting cases, hopefully. So this is our two paradigms when we're discussing fuzzing. But the security community seems to agree more the fuzzing strategy based on evolutionary algorithms. Because who in the room heard about AFL? AFL is you heard about AFL because you were at another presentation at Apple. Yeah, you raised your hand back there too, it's true. So AFL is a tool that was built by Michael Zalewski, which is a Google security researcher, an amazing guy. And he created this AFL, which basically is fuzzing using genetic algorithms, and they're using this based on code coverage. So exactly what I have described earlier, use genetic algorithms to increase code coverage. So we have this tool which is amazing and it's free and everyone can use to find vulnerabilities. And it's pretty awesome because it's easy to set up and it's quite easy to employ, and it has already a huge trophy case of found vulnerabilities in all kinds of products that you might use right now. So after we decided upon what fuzzing tool we are going to use, we are going to proceed with our fuzzing campaign. So what we have to do, first we have to write an harness. Harness is a piece of code that makes the actual call to the vulnerable DLL. Then we have to provide instrumentation because the fuzzing needs to know the degree of code coverage for a certain sample. And for that, on Windows, we can use DynamoRio if you haven't heard about it. It's a tool that makes runtime instrumentation. And it gives you information about the code coverage at runtime without any need to recompile the code. Sorry. Then we have to provide some test cases to begin with for the fuzzer. And those samples are going to be mutated, and hopefully they are going to increase the code coverage sufficiently enough as to reach our vulnerable method. Then we have to minimize this test corpus because we do not want to waste CPU cycles with samples that do not increase the code coverage with a whole lot. Then we have to set up the fuzzer and actually start the fuzzing campaign. So this is the piece of code that this is the harness. This is the piece of code that makes the actual call to the vulnerable API as we have identified it during the reversing part. So what you have to do first in a harness, you have to load the EMF test case in our case, and after the loading, you have to make the actual call to the vulnerable DLL, which is EMF to VMF bits as we saw earlier. Okay, so we're doing it in a nested for loop because we have some flags and we do not want to, and we want to go to the whole situations and make sure that we have all the bases covered in order to not miss our method of interest. And for sample generation, you use a similar code. Basically, we are using the metafile class API in order to generate interesting samples for our fuzzer. For starters, we create the EMF file and we populate it with an EMF stretch BLT record as we saw earlier, because when the EMF file is going to be processed, the DLL will serve the right handler for it and hopefully will call our method. So after we have generated these samples, we come up with 32 test cases, and those have to be minimized because, as we saw earlier, we don't want to waste CPU cycles. And from 32 samples, after the minimization, we have 10 samples now. We can do minimization with a script that was that is on the AFL Git, and it simply takes each input and serves to the application. And using the NumRio instrumentation framework, it measures the degree of coverage. And if the sample doesn't improve by much the degree of coverage, then it discards that sample. And it keeps only the interesting samples for our fuzzing campaign. So 1 day and 21 hours later, this is the state of my files. I started 1 master and 2 slaves. And on the other screen marked with red is the state of the whole fuzzing attempt. So unfortunately it cannot be seen clearly, but in only almost 2 days, with 3 instances of fuzzing, we made 12 million executions of the actual code and the vulnerable code to the DLL. Then we have a cumulative speed of 250 executions per second. And we have identified 82 crashes, which is what interested us in the first place. Hopefully one of those crashes is the one that we are interested in. So by this point I'm thinking that my fuzzer behaved quite nicely. But it behaved so nice that my antivirus believes that I've generated malware. So it pops us when I started to analyze these crashes. Symantec starts complaining and said, "What are those samples? Are those malware?" So this could be an interesting research project using genetic algorithms in order to foil signatures, or maybe even use genetic algorithms to generate malware. Who knows? So after we have to actually go through each of the 82 crashes in order to understand what's going on there and see if their findings are valid or not. So we can use a certain tool for that. It's called BugID. And what this tool does is essentially run each test case using the Windows debugger in headless mode. And this will speed up the analyzing process. And when BugID identifies a crash, it creates a report for it in which you can say, well, this was a crash, here is the call stack, and here is the method within which crashed. And my heart starts popping really fast because I identify one of the crashes being in exact the same vulnerable method that the ZDI report states the rotated stretch BLT. So now I really want to see what's going on there, and I import this generated sample by the fuzzer into the debugger. And so, indeed, it crashes on the expected place. Here is the call stack. Just imagine that you would have to come up with a sample on your own in order to crash in the exact same place without doing fuzzing whatsoever. Just imagine that. What would be the headaches? So this vulnerability was definitely discovered using fuzzing. Here we can see on the disassembly that the crash took place in the exact place as we saw on the IDA, on the memcopy operation, the unsafe one. So it is indeed a valid finding. So I guess we have our POC for the vulnerability and a starting place in order to develop a complete exploit for it. Also, the Windows debugger have a quite neat tool. It's called Exploitable. It's pretty old, but it does its job. So what it does, it looks at the memory state that the crash is, and it looks at the state of the registers. And based on those states, it identifies whether the vulnerability is exploitable or not. In this case, it seems that the vulnerable is not close to a null pointer, so it deems the vulnerability as being exploitable. So I guess we can gain control of the instruction point register and develop a full exploit for it. So after the analysis, this is one of the nicest things about fuzzing. Not only that I have uncovered a working proof of concept for the vulnerability that I started analyzing in the first place, but I discovered more POC for multiple vulnerabilities in GDI. More than that, because I have configured my fuzzer to make as big as a code coverage as possible, I have identified 5 more interesting crashes in different places of the DLL, not only GDI Plus, but other DLLs as well. And I submitted my findings to the Microsoft Security Research Center, and they decided that 2 from those 5 reports were actual valid findings and actual bugs in the GDI subsystem. So this was my presentation. In the future, I plan to do more fuzzing. Thank you. If you have any questions about fuzzing or you're enthusiastic and you want to try the tools, we can talk outside and I can share more of my knowledge again this year. Thank you so much for your attention.